Continuing on with my exploration into Discworld, I have now read Mort. Or listened to Mort. Look, audiobooks are just easier for me. But yeah, now this is one that I'd heard quite a bit about, just broadly, in terms of it often showing up either on lists of people's favorite Discworld books or on lists of ones that are recommended to people still relatively new to it. And I didn't really know much about it beyond that. I knew it had a focus on Death, who is a character who I have met in some of the other Discworld books. So I had some context for Death, although the most context I have for him is Hogfather, which I didn't read the book. I reviewed a couple years back the TV version of that. But like I feel like I had enough of a sense of Death that it was time to take a look at this. Oddly, though, somewhat to my surprise, the main character, even the titular character, is not a reference to Death. I kind of assumed it was because, mortuary, I just thought it was just a term being used. But no, it's actually a character. There is a character, a young man named Mort, who is awkward, well-meaning, but a little bit, boy, what do we do with this boy? Kind of a person, like he's nice and he's sweet and he's fine, but like you got to do something with your life, and I have no idea what you're ever going to be good at, kind of a character. And he ends up becoming Death's apprentice. So Death is a big feature. And we get, I think, or at least what I assume, definitely of the books I've read, the most thorough examination of Death's job day to day and what it's just like, because Mort goes on the job with him and sees what it's like, and we get we get both Death's perspective on his job and also Mort's perspective on it, and it is interesting. In hindsight, it doesn't feel like it while you're reading it. In hindsight, there's a shockingly large amount of lore and general world building in this, but it's very organic because it's integrated through just watching Death go about his job, and that's what the premise is. So we have a format that allows us to get a very thorough look at a lot of corners of Discworld, and some of the more overt references that I've come across to things like the gods, which is not something that I've really hit too much in the ones that I've read so far. But things like that, how different places operate, and just the general feel of the world. This does a lot of that while also telling a pretty entertaining story. Death is always a really interesting character because it's hard to know how exactly to describe him. The sense I tend to get from him is that he wants to care, but he doesn't really always know how. So like he wants to understand people better. He wants to care about them, but at the end of the day, like his job is his job. It has nothing to do with justice or karma or anything else. This is just what has to happen. And it creates an interesting dynamic that he has that inherent attachment that comes from the being that's going to do what he does, while also like having some desire to better understand, but also just not being very good at better understanding. There's a whole sequence where he basically tries to understand fun, and it's a little bit mixed in terms of the outcome. We also get some more information, or in some cases, it might be the first presentation. Again, I'm reading these all out of order, so I'm jumping all over the place. So I can't tell you if this is the first appearance of any of this. But I can tell you that we get some background on Albert, who's sort of Death's servant, butler. I don't know. And that was interesting. It was especially interesting finding out more about Albert because the circumstances under which I've encountered him before, he's fairly restrained. He's pretty low key, but some stuff goes on here that gives him a much more prominent stage. You're like, oh, you've got other stuff going on too, don't you, dude? All right. And we also meet Isabel, which is Death's daughter, adopted. And I had not encountered her before, and I'm a little mixed fixed on her. She's not a bad character by any stretch, but specifically some of the stuff that happens in relations to her relationship with Mort, I'll save that for a spoiler section, I suppose. It didn't quite sell it right. And I have also somewhat mixed feelings about the princess character that shows up later. But there are also lots of just fun characters. There's a number of wizards who show up. They are quite entertaining. There's a lot of great individual scenes, like when Mort goes to a pub and where things go from there. And also to see what his experiences are doing that changes Mort in some fairly significant ways, and in some, I think, well-communicated ways. Because that could have felt very like, boy, where is this coming from? But you feel like it's built up properly, and the weight of it is there where it needs to be. Oh, also, we get some good time with Binky. That's Death's horse. I love Binky. Binky's great. But as is very typical of Prachett books, Discworld books, not that he only ever did Discworld, but you know what I mean. There's a lot of great scenes with characters who we never see again, but they have great single scenes, great single moments, and it just makes this. I definitely deeply understand how Prachett was able to get as many books from this setting as he does. He clearly loves every corner of the world that he created and is able to tap into all these aspects, whether it be for the core of the story or whether it be for just a little one-off scene, just a little bit in a rundown pub, a little bit in a diner, a little bit at the unseen university, just because these little moments and these things are just there for him to pull on and drop in, and they make sense, and they don't need major focus, because if they need it, they'll get major focus elsewhere in the book, or elsewhere in the series rather, or it's just like, this is just the world that he made. I can see why it was viable for him to make as many books as he did set in this world, because it's and also why people love them all so much. It's just nice to be here. It's just nice to be in Discworld. So I did want to talk a little bit of spoilers for sort of my few reservations that I have. So I said I'm a little bit mixed on the Princess Kaylee. Here are the things that I do appreciate. I appreciate that after Mort I am getting into spoilers now, if I didn't make that clear. So after Mort fails to do his duty and ensure her death, and instead kills her assassin, I like that it gets pointed out very flatly. Like, it's very obvious Mort has a crush on her, but like, you don't get to have her. Well, I saved her life. Yeah, but that makes it hers, not yours. And I'm glad that is pointed out flatly. That said, Kaylee as a character, I don't know. Maybe I was missing something earlier on, or maybe it's just because she's responding early on to just the oddness of the situation she's in, that, she came across as something close to a normal person, but then towards the end there was a lot more emphasis on how being a royal had kind of detached her from normal life. And I guess that it would have helped if that had been made more prevalent at the front end of her use, because it felt like there was a shift. There might not have been. I just might have been, not noticing that so much because it got way less emphasis. But by the time it started happening towards the end and playing into some of the climax and also playing into some of the humor, I felt like, oh, I guess I hadn't really fully taken on board that part of her character. And then there's Isabel. And Isabel falling in love with Mort does feel perfunctory. It feels like it just happens. I mean, I appreciate that a lampshade gets hung on it, in that when Isabel tells Death, I love him, and even Mort himself goes, you do? When did that happen? Because Yeah, that's kind of my question too. When did that happen? And it's not to say that like it's totally unbelievable. I could they have good enough chemistry as characters that I totally believe they could fall in love. Where it loses me is I don't think they've spent enough time together. And it runs the risk of reading a little bit like, did you just fall in love with him because he's the first person even close to your age that you have encountered in your life, like at all? And it's just because he's there. He's the first viable romantic candidate you've ever really had. And so just now you're in love with him. I'm sure that wasn't the intent, or at least I hope that wasn't the intent, since it doesn't deconstruct that concept. But it can't help but feel like that a little bit, because since Mort certainly is so wrapped up in his job as Death's assistant and briefly as just Death, he definitely doesn't have the time to get very reciprocal or even give her that much, other than just, maybe just a general sort of feeling like, oh, I feel like we could have something here. And she leaps right to, I'm in love with him. I don't know. It's undercooked. It's not completely unbelievable in the way that I'm like, I don't believe that would never work. I'm like, no, I could. I just don't quite think the legwork happened for that specific aspect, which is a shame. I suppose as a comparison, I'm going to forget the characters' names because I'm bad at them. I'm sorry. And I would have looked them up, except I didn't realize I was going to make this comparison until I sat down to review. So like in Guards, there was a budding romance between the captain of the guard and this noble woman who raises swamp dragons. And that their interactions had some inherent romantic tension, and that felt, even though they only saw each other sporadically and often in odd circumstances, that felt like that built, whereas this just doesn't. Yes, they're around each other every now and then, but not in a way that feels like it's building specifically connection between the two of them. So that's about the one thing where I feel like that doesn't quite work. Now, it hardly ruins the book, because the book doesn't pin an excessive amount of narrative weight to that idea. There's a little narrative weight on it, but it's not like it pivots the entire plot on swallowing the idea that these two are in love, or at the very least that she's in love with him, which is good, because if it had, I don't think it would have supported that. But as it is, it still works. And like, of course, it's got Terry Pratchett's wit, his comfort, his humor, and just his love of characters. There isn't a single character in this book who has a line at any point who I wouldn't happily spend more time with. Every character he ever puts words in their mouth, none of them feel perfunctory. Like just, well, I need a character to fulfill X task or give X bit of exposition or tell this character, go that way to get to the story you're looking for. He'll have characters who do that, but still find a way to inject them with life and a sense of existence outside of this one interaction that we'll only ever see them in. And that's such an impressive skill. Mort. Have you read this particular Discworld book? If not, but you have read other Discworld books, or even if you have, what's your favorite depiction of death? Is it this? Is it another one? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Patreon pays the bills and is what enables me to do this as my living. And I was also, I forgot to mention, commissioned to review this through Patreon. So this was a commissioned review. But even if you don't want to support me at that level, there's rewards at every tier. There's links to other things I do below. Like, share, subscribe also help me out. But, don't worry too much about it. We take a relaxed attitude around here, so you can come on back next time you need a break. Well, it's Patreon supporter shout-out time, folks. So thank you to Robin Moore, Zubin Lutfulla, Tarak, The Thing That Goes Doink in the Anime, Oliver B., Angus Bjarnason, Linda Walters, Emu Delkey, Leotha Boyd, Toy Lowly, Becky Spark, Fernabilax the Poodle, Zach, Tracy Scrabbit, General Contact Unit Problem Child, Angry Casperl, Tim Price, Adam R.D.L. Taylor, Shayla Gourlay, and Brendan LaRose. Thanks so much for your help. You can get your name read out too. Check out the rewards in the Patreon. Is that what they should do? Should they check the Patreon? Yeah.